He almost didn't open the door. It was past midnight. The rain was the kind that doesn't announce itself. No thunder, no wind, just a cold and steady fall that made the whole street feel like it was slowly disappearing. Malik had gotten Zoe to sleep an hour ago. The house was quiet. He had no reason to move. Then the knock came. 2 sounds, barely loud enough to be called knocking at all. He opened the door and found a woman standing in the rain, holding a boy who had gone completely still against her chest. Not sleeping, just quiet in the way children go quiet when their bodies have run out of options. The woman's jacket wasn't wrapped around herself, it was wrapped around him. She didn't ask to come inside, didn't ask for money, didn't explain herself or apologize for the hour. She just looked at him and said, "A glass of milk, that's all, for my son." Something about the way she said it stopped him cold. No trembling, no performance, just a woman who had clearly knocked on doors before this one and been turned away, and who had decided, without bitterness, to try one more time. Malik Carter was not the kind of man who let strangers in at midnight. He stepped aside anyway. He had no idea that one glass of milk, one small, ordinary glass of milk, was about to change both of their lives forever. If you've ever believed that the smallest act of kindness can rewrite someone's entire story, stay with me. And if this kind of story moves you, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from. Malik Carter was 34 years old and had learned, through the kind of education that doesn't happen in classrooms, that love and loss were not opposites. They were the same door. You walked through it and got both, whether you wanted both or not. He lived in a modest house on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where people waved from driveways and left casseroles on porches when someone was sick, but also kept enough distance to let a man be private if he needed to be. Malik needed to be. He worked in facilities management at the county hospital, kept regular hours, maintained the house, coached Zoe's soccer team on Saturday mornings when the season allowed. From the outside, his life looked like a man who had things together. From the inside, it looked like a man who had decided that keeping things together was the same as being okay, and had stopped questioning the difference. His wife, Diana, had died 5 years ago. A car accident on a rainy November evening. She'd been 3 miles from home when a truck ran a red light. Zoe had been 3 years old. Malik had been 29, and for a long time after, he had existed more than he had lived. He got up because Zoe needed him to get up. He ate because he needed to be functional. He laughed sometimes, genuinely, because Zoe was funny in the way children are funny when they have no idea they're being funny. But he had built a perimeter around himself that was polite enough that most people never noticed it was there. He was not a hard man. He was a careful one. There was a difference, even if it didn't always look like it. Zoe was 8 years old and operated entirely without that perimeter. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's habit of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was thinking, though she didn't know that second thing about herself. She was the kind of child who asked the questions adults spent years learning to avoid. Not to be difficult, but because it genuinely didn't occur to her that some things were supposed to stay unsaid. She noticed everything. She remembered everything. And she had grown up understanding, in the wordless way children understand things they've never been told directly, that her father carried something heavy and quiet that she wasn't supposed to try to lift for him. She tried anyway, regularly, usually through questions. Naomi Brooks had not planned to be standing on a stranger's porch at midnight in the rain. She was 28. Her son Isaiah was 18 months old, round-faced and serious-eyed, with a laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone 3 times his size, on the days when he laughed. He hadn't laughed much recently. He'd been fussy from hunger, worn out from being carried, and had finally gone limp against her shoulder somewhere around hour 3 of walking. Naomi had once had a lease, a job, a checking account with actual money in it, and a husband she thought she could trust. The husband's name was Marcus. He had left 8 months ago, but in many ways he had started leaving long before that, slowly, methodically, in ways she hadn't recognized as leaving at the time. He had managed their finances so completely that when he walked out, Naomi discovered she had no individual credit history, no savings in her own name, and a collection of joint accounts he'd already closed. He left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. It said, "You can't do this without me." He wrote it like a fact. She had spent 8 months trying to prove it wasn't one. She lost her job 4 months after he left. The company restructured and her position was cut. She was 2 months behind on rent when her landlord changed the locks. She packed what she could carry, Isaiah's bag first, then hers. The one person she could have gone to was her mother, Evelyn, who lived 40 minutes across town and would have opened her door without a single question asked. But Evelyn had been rushed to the hospital that afternoon with chest pains that turned out to be a heart attack, and Naomi's phone had died before she could find out which hospital, which ward, which room. She had a crumpled piece of paper in her jacket pocket, a number she'd written down months ago in case of emergency, that had the name of the hospital on it. She just needed to get there. She just needed Isaiah to eat something first. She had knocked on 6 doors before Malik's. At 2 of them, no one answered. At 2 others, she was told through the door to go away. At one, a man opened up, looked at her for a long moment, and said he was going to call the police if she didn't leave. At the last one, a woman opened the door with a kind face, listened to Naomi's entire situation, then told her she was sorry but she couldn't help, and gently closed the door. Naomi had stood on that last porch for a moment. She wasn't angry. She was just tired in a way that had moved past the point of feeling like anything in particular. Then she looked down at Isaiah, whose mouth was making small, dry movements in his sleep, and she started walking again. Malik's house was the 7th. He stepped aside and let her in, and Naomi walked through the door with the caution of someone who understood that kindness was sometimes a setup. She stood just inside the entryway, dripping onto the mat, Isaiah still pressed to her chest, and she watched Malik move to the kitchen without a word. He didn't ask her to sit. He didn't ask her questions. He filled a small saucepan with milk and turned on the burner, and the normalcy of that single action, the sound of a stove clicking on, the smell of something warm beginning, made something in Naomi's chest come loose in a way she wasn't ready for. She pressed her lips together and looked at the wall until she had it under control. Malik brought the warmed milk in a cup small enough for Isaiah to hold. Then he took a towel from the linen closet and held it out to Naomi. Then he went back to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of soup left over from dinner, set it on the table in front of the armchair without making any ceremony of it. Naomi sat. She tipped the cup to Isaiah's lips. The boy drank slowly at first, then urgently, both tiny hands wrapped around hers on the cup. She didn't look at Malik while this was happening. When Isaiah was done, she set the cup down and made herself eat 3 spoonfuls of the soup before she spoke. "I need to find my mother," she said. "She was taken to the hospital today. I don't know which room she's in." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper. It was soft from handling, the ink slightly smeared. She held it out to him. "This is the hospital. My phone is dead." Malik took the paper and looked at it. Then he looked at Naomi, who was sitting with Isaiah on her lap, one hand moving in slow circles on the boy's back, her eyes steady on his face. She wasn't pleading, she was just watching. He plugged his phone in on the counter and made the call. The charge nurse on the cardiac floor confirmed that Evelyn Brooks had been admitted that afternoon, that her condition was serious but stable, and that she was asking for her daughter. Malik set the phone down. He looked at Naomi, who was reading his face the way people read faces when they've learned the hard way that what people say and what their expressions say are not always the same thing. He said, "Your mother's stable. She's asking for you." Naomi closed her eyes, just for a second. Then she opened them and said very quietly, "Okay." What happened next was not something Malik had planned. He went down the hall to Zoe's room and pushed the door open. She was already half awake. She slept light, always had. And she looked up at him from her pillow with the unsurprised expression of a child who had somehow expected this. "There's a woman in the living room," he said. "She has a little boy. Her mom is in the hospital and she needs a ride." Zoe considered this for a moment. "Is the little boy cold?" "He was," Malik said. "He's okay now. Zoe sat up and reached for her sweatshirt. "Are we taking them?" Malik looked at his daughter, 8 years old, pulling her sweatshirt on in the dark without being asked, without complaint, with nothing but the assumption that of course they were doing this because what else would they do? And he felt something shift in him that he didn't have a name for yet. "Yeah," he said. "Get your shoes." Zoe was at the front door before he was. The four of them walked out into the rain. Malik with his keys, Naomi with Isaiah, Zoe with her shoes only halfway tied. They got into the car and Malik pulled out of the driveway and turned toward the hospital, the windshield wipers pushing the rain aside in steady, quiet arcs. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes. Isaiah had fallen back to sleep. The city moved past the windows in streaks of orange and wet light. In the back seat, Zoe looked at Naomi, then at Isaiah, then at her own hands. Then she folded them in her lap and looked straight ahead and said nothing. And that was somehow exactly the right thing. The hospital at midnight had a quality of stillness different from other kinds of stillness. It wasn't peaceful. It was suspended. The whole building holding its breath, full of people waiting for news that would either change everything or confirm what they'd already been dreading. Malik found seats in the waiting area near the elevator bank and settled Zoe in with her jacket pulled up around her shoulders. Naomi had gone to the charge desk with Isaiah still in her arms, talking to a nurse in a low, controlled voice. Malik watched her from across the room and noticed what he'd noticed in his kitchen, that she held herself with a discipline that wasn't confidence exactly, but something that had been built in the place where confidence used to be, out of whatever materials were available. The nurse led her through a set of double doors. She didn't look back. She was gone for 11 minutes. Malik counted without meaning to. When she came back through the doors, her face had changed. Not collapsed, rearranged. The control was still there, but something under it had shifted. She walked to where Malik and Zoe were sitting and said, "She's awake. She recognized me." Then she sat down beside Malik and pressed her free hand flat against her knee and didn't say anything else. Isaiah stirred, made a soft sound, and settled back against her. Zoe looked up, looked at Naomi's face, then looked at her father with an expression that said she understood more than she should at 8 years old. They sat like that for a while. Eventually, Naomi said, without looking at him, "You should go home. You have her to think about." "We're okay," Malik said. "You don't have to stay." "I know." She looked at him then. He met her eyes and didn't look away. And after a moment, she turned back to the middle distance and said nothing more about it. Later, while Naomi was back inside with her mother and Zoe had dozed off in the chair beside him, a hospital social worker stopped by the waiting area. A steady-voiced woman named Patricia, who apparently made the rounds of the cardiac ward every night, checking on families who'd arrived without plans. She spoke to Malik briefly, then to Naomi when she returned, and within 20 minutes had arranged for Naomi and Isaiah to stay at a family shelter 2 blocks from the hospital. Clean, safe, no cost for the first 2 weeks while Evelyn recovered. Naomi accepted it with the look of someone who had decided, at least for tonight, to stop fighting the current. On the drive home in the early hours of the morning, Zoe sat in the back seat and waited until they'd been driving for 5 minutes before she spoke. "Is her mom going to be okay?" "The doctors think so," Malik said. "She needs time." Zoe was quiet for a moment, then, "Does she have anyone else?" "Not right now," Malik said. Zoe pressed her forehead against the window and watched the streetlights pass. "Then we should keep helping." She said it the way children say things that adults have spent years complicating, like it was simply obvious, like there was no other reasonable conclusion. Malik drove and said nothing, but his hands on the wheel relaxed slightly. The next 3 days settled into a shape that none of them had designed. Malik went to the hospital after his morning shift. He brought food, easy things, the kind you could eat standing up, because Naomi rarely sat long enough for a proper meal. He brought books for Zoe, who came on the days she didn't have school and had appointed herself unofficial entertainer of Isaiah, which mostly involved making faces at him until he laughed his oversized laugh. But something else was happening with Zoe that Malik noticed slowly. The way you notice a change in weather not by any single moment, but by the accumulated feel of several hours. She stopped asking to go. Not all at once. Just once she said she had homework. Once she said she was tired. Once she sat at the kitchen table while Malik got ready and didn't move. And when he asked if she was coming, she looked at her cereal and said, "You go, it's fine." That evening after dinner, she asked, "Does Isaiah have a dad?" Malik looked up. "He does. He's not around right now." Zoe nodded slowly. "Is that why you keep going? Because he doesn't have a dad?" "Partly," Malik said. "What's the other part?" He looked at his daughter. Her head tilted left, the way it always tilted when she was working through something, and he said, "Because it's the right thing to do." Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you like her?" Malik said, "She's been through a lot, Zoe." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. She looked back at him, calm and direct. And in that moment, she was so much her mother's daughter that it pressed on something in his chest. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Zoe looked at her plate. "Mom wouldn't be mad," she said. Then she got up and put her dish in the sink and went to her room, and Malik sat at the table alone for a long time after that. The next day, Zoe came to the hospital. She didn't say anything about the night before. She sat with Isaiah in the corner of the waiting room and made faces at him until he laughed, the same as before. But twice, Malik caught her watching Naomi, not with hostility, just with the serious, measuring look of a child taking stock of something she didn't yet have words for. It was a start. On the fourth day, Naomi asked to speak to the nurse handling her mother's billing. What she found stopped her cold. Part of Evelyn's initial consultation fees had been settled by an outside payment. It took her 2 conversations with hospital staff to trace it back to Malik. She found him in the cafeteria with Zoe eating a sandwich. She came to the table and stood there and waited until he looked up. "You paid part of my mother's bill," she said. Malik set the sandwich down. "Some of the initial fees, yeah." "Without asking me?" "Yes." Naomi pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She put both hands flat on the table and looked at him with an expression that was not anger alone. It was something older and more complicated. "I need you to understand something," she said. Her voice was even, deliberate. "Marcus paid for things too. He paid for everything, actually. And every time he did, I found out later what it cost me. Not in money, in something else." She paused. "I'm not saying you're him. I'm saying I can't afford to not say something when a man makes financial decisions that involve me without asking." Malik looked at her for a long moment. He didn't get defensive. He didn't list his reasons or point out that he'd meant well, because he understood, in a way he couldn't have explained if asked, that none of that was the point. He said, "You're right. I should have asked. I won't do it again without checking with you first." Naomi watched him. She was waiting for the but, the however, the qualifier that would reframe his apology as actually her misunderstanding. It didn't come. She exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said, and this time it didn't sound like a business transaction. Across the table, Zoe was eating her apple slices with elaborate concentration, pretending very hard that she hadn't heard every word. That same evening, walking back through the hospital corridor, Naomi mentioned Marcus. She said it flatly, like something she'd been deciding whether to say. "Isaiah's father called. Someone told him about my mother." She paused. "He wants to know where Isaiah is." Malik kept walking. "Does he have custody rights?" "Legally, yes. Joint." Another pause. "He's never used them. Not once in 8 months. He didn't want custody. He wanted leverage. When I'm doing fine, he ignores Isaiah completely. But right now I'm not doing fine, and I think he knows that." Malik said, "Has he contacted you directly?" "Not yet." She glanced at him sideways. "He will." The rest of the corridor passed in silence. On the 5th day, Malik went in to see Evelyn. Naomi had suggested it herself, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure why she was suggesting it, after Evelyn had asked twice who the man was that had brought her daughter to the hospital. Malik went in alone, with Naomi waiting in the hallway. Evelyn was smaller than he'd imagined. She lay in the hospital bed with the stillness of someone whose body had just survived something significant. But her eyes were alert and aimed at him the moment he walked through the door. She studied his face the way a person studies a face they've seen before in a different context and are trying to place. Malik introduced himself. He told her simply that he'd driven Naomi and Isaiah to the hospital the night of her admission. He thanked her for asking about him. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What street do you live on?" He told her. She looked at him for a long time. "Years ago," she said slowly, "there was a young man. He'd parked his car outside my house, just sitting there. It was late. I could see from the kitchen window that he hadn't moved in a while." She paused. "I went out and knocked on his window. He looked at me like he'd forgotten where he was." Malik went still. "I brought him inside," she said, "fed him something, let him sleep in the spare room. In the morning, before he left, I told him—" She stopped, looked at him carefully. "I think you already know what I told him." Malik's throat tightened. He looked at this woman in the hospital bed, the woman he'd driven away from without knowing her name, without ever finding out where she lived or how to thank her. And he nodded once, slowly. "I've thought about that night a lot," he said. "I didn't know how to find you, or to whom I was supposed to say thank you." Evelyn reached out and patted his hand with the deliberate slowness of someone conserving energy. "You found my daughter instead," she said. "That seems about right." When Malik came back out into the hallway, Naomi looked at his face and said, "What happened?" He told her. Not everything, not in a structured way, but enough. The night 5 years ago, the kitchen light, the spare room, the words that had sent him back to Zoe in the morning. Naomi listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "She never told me that story," she said finally. "I don't think she would," Malik said. Naomi leaned back against the corridor wall. Something was moving through her expression, complicated and layered, the kind of feeling that doesn't resolve into one clean thing. After a moment, she said, "She always told me that the most important things you do for people don't make a good story. They're just a meal, or a door opened, or a night where someone isn't alone." She paused. "I thought she was talking in general." Malik said nothing. The words settled between them in the hallway, and he let them sit there. The complication came 2 days later. Evelyn's condition worsened, an arrhythmia that required immediate intervention. The doctor spoke to Naomi outside the cardiac unit in careful, measured language. Naomi stood with Isaiah on her hip and listened to every word. When the doctor left, she stood still for a moment. Then she took out her phone and opened her contacts and scrolled through them, and Malik, standing nearby, could see from her expression what she was finding. No one she could call without it costing her something she wasn't willing to pay. She put the phone in her pocket. That was when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened and Marcus walked out. He was put together in the way of a man who had prepared for this. Neat clothes, measured walk. He came down the hallway and stopped in front of Naomi and looked at Isaiah first, then at her, then past her at Malik, with the brief, assessing look of a man recalculating something. "I heard things got complicated," he said. His voice was not unkind. That was the thing about Marcus. The voice was never unkind. "I came to help." "I don't need your help," Naomi said. "Isaiah needs stability." Gentle, reasonable. "You've got your mom in there. You don't have a place to stay. You don't have income. Nobody's judging you, Naomi. I'm just saying let me take him for a little while. Give yourself space to get things in order." It was the same voice that had spent years making the same kinds of statements in the same reasonable tone. And the cumulative weight of all those reasonable statements had been to make Naomi doubt her own capability so thoroughly that when he finally left, she'd half believed the note he'd written. She was tired. She hadn't slept properly in 5 days. Her mother was through those double doors, and her account was at 0, and the person who had been showing up for her every day was someone she'd known for less than a week. All of that was on her face, not because she was showing it, but because she was trying not to, and the effort was visible. Malik walked over. He didn't say anything to Marcus. He stood next to Naomi and said quietly, "Hey." You okay? It was a small thing, not a confrontation, not a rescue, just one person standing beside another person in a hallway, asking if she was okay.